everybody. Welcome to another Friday episode of Besides the News. Jack and I found lots of favor in this last week, enjoyed it quite a bit. So we think it's a good format. A lot of you responded to it and said that you enjoyed the new format. So welcome and glad to have you with us. Jack, good to see you. How's your week been?
Oh, busy as usual. How about you, Aaron?
Yeah, same. I actually traveled all over the place. We dropped our son off in Boston, and then the last episode I was in Calgary, and then ended up in Edmonton, and then Great Falls, Montana, and so I was all over the place. But it was great to see some family, be a part of a wedding, and it was just it was kind of nice. And Canada's kind of one of those home away from home things because I went to college there, so it was really
Oh, I
awesome
didn't
to
know
be
that.
back. Yeah, it was great, and I went to school in Calgary, and so I took my kids back through town. We rode those little rentable scooters, we zipped around
Mhm.
all over downtown and had a great dinner at a wonderful restaurant that's a favorite. And then just, yeah, saw a lot of wonderful things, got to see some old friends. And my wife's family is Canadian. So we ended up kind of on this Eat Your Way Across the Prairies tour after the wedding. So it was great. It was a lot of fun.
That's great. I would love I want to like Canada more than I do, but last time I went there, it was a while ago now, and I spent time in Toronto and Montreal, and the people were great and everything. In fact, it was a speaking tour many years ago of some synagogues and stuff. We were doing a lot with the Jewish organizations over there, and they were awesome. But in Montreal, they just really didn't like me when I was out in public because I was English, and it's so French. And just the English French beef, just who knows what it even really is about anymore. But we just don't like each other. So I found it quite uncomfortable there, and I found people were quite rude.
That's
I don't
funny.
know whether it was because I'm English or it was because they're French, and the French could be have been described as rude. I'll say it that way.
And French Canadians tend to have that kind of generalization about them, and it's probably rightfully earned. I think in many of my encounters with French Canadians, it's been a little bit like that. No offense to the French Canadians, but who are listening, probably the one Francophile that's listening to us. But yeah, it was great. It was wonderful. Canada is beautiful. I have been very discouraged by their politics during
Hmm.
the Trudeau era, and I'm not sure what Carney will be like. I think he's better. But I think he's kind of one of the same. Very fascinating. Just kind of a side note on this. My cousin he married a farmer who he farms a lot of. He's an industrial farmer. I mean, he makes no apologies about it. Kind of an advocate for Roundup and some other things, and good in a good way. I mean, I think he understands and thinks like industrial farming is the only way to feed the world,
Yeah.
and he might be right to some degree about it, but he farms almost 4,000 acres. So he's a big player in that area. And he was, talking about the tariffs and some of the things that have happened, and they've impacted him dramatically. I mean, he exports 90% of his grain to the United States. So it's a lot of that wheat ends up in the United States. And he was just saying that the tariffs have been pretty brutal to their pricing and some of the things that have happened. And so it was fascinating to hear that side of the story, and I totally, and he kind of ends up, he said Mark Carney wrote a pretty good book that he's read, and he was not a fan of him as he was kind of coming into office, but he's like, well, I'm actually becoming a little bit more sympathetic to his sort of moderate stances. And it does seem like that to some degree, but
Well, I mean, he appears as moderate because the liberal left. I don't even like using these terms anymore because nothing really
no,
makes sense anymore. When you
it
say
doesn't.
the left, like what are you talking about? But I just mean broadly speaking, the not progressive left, but the old school
Yeah.
left, whatever you want to call it. Um, it changed. It doesn't
Yes.
exist in the same way anymore. And so what happened is it went extremely radical, extremely progressive. And then the moment someone comes along who is somewhat more moderate than that, they get described as a moderate. But if you put Mark
Right.
Carney and Sir Keir Starmer, who's our current prime minister in the UK, um, if you put them up against the leftists and the liberals of old, that they're still quite radical.
Yes.
The problem is Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, they know they have to appeal to two bases. They have to appeal to the old Democrat, American Democrat style left, their own left in their
Yeah.
own country, but also to the modern progressives too. And so the fact that they're trying to appeal to the modern progressives even at all, I think rules them out as being moderate. I don't think you can consider
Agree with
them
you.
moderate in any way because of that. Um, uh, remember Mark Carney was the governor of Bank of England. He's
Right.
got a long and storied history in politics, despite not being, a politician. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. He strikes me as another Tony Blair, and Tony Blair
Yep.
positioned himself as a moderate too. The
For
third
sure.
way. He took the Labour Party, which was the Socialist Party. He followed the third way. He really very much went down this path of a mixed economy in the UK, which is basically what describes the UK today. The best way to describe our economy is mixed. We have socialized healthcare and so on, but we also have quite a large private sector too. And I think that's good. But the problem is those moderates always come with really crazy ideas. And Tony Blair, his crazy idea was opening the borders in 1997 to, the kind of immigration the United Kingdom has never seen before, ever. And what happened, I think, and this is relevant to Carney because, people will soon find out he's not as moderate as he paints himself to be.
Yeah.
But what happened is Tony Blair, positioned as this moderate guy, completely transformed British society. And I don't just mean transformed the way that it looks and feels in terms of
No.
culture and visuals. What I mean is we went from a society where people would move to the United Kingdom from the old empire countries, including, Jamaica and India and, wherever we've been. People would come. The Windrush generation was blacks who came from Jamaica and those islands to the United Kingdom in the mid 20th century. And they were welcomed for the most part in the UK. There were racist elements of the country that didn't want them there at all. But for the most part, they were welcomed. They became fully British. They would have portraits of the Queen on the wall in their living room. They were fundamentally British in every way. And we went from that to welcoming in huge numbers, as many as 1 million people a year. And now what's happened is not only does the country look and feel different because we don't have this same shared common culture anymore, but I think we've actually made the country a little more racist because people have seen this problem and they direct their energy towards the people that came here rather than the people that facilitated that change. Which is a huge problem. And so my point is moderates can cause a huge amount of damage, not just in terms of how the country looks and feels, but the feelings of the native people from there. And have we created a mess in the UK. And I expect the same is just going to happen in Canada.
Well, it's interesting. Canada, for sure, looks different than when I was there 30 years ago as a student. You can and Calgary was always we used to joke because the very best Chinese food in the world is in Canada, strangely. I mean, it's just a funny thing. It's part of their heritage. And it is a very diverse culture. I mean, it's a very diverse landscape, always has been, but it's markedly more in this era. So it's especially within the cities. I think London, if I heard the statistic correctly, London is now 70% non-British original, like non-heritage British. And I don't know if that's the right statistic or not, but one way or the other, when you walk through London, it is a very different place than it was 30 years ago.
I saw something the other day and they call it the London banana. So what it is if you look at a map of London and Greater London, there's like a banana-shaped wedge that is low crime, high salary, high property value, mostly still British, very safe. And everything outside of there is basically a hellhole with rising crime rates. People would describe it as unrecognizable in some parts. And that's true. Like, I understand a major city is going to be diverse. You're going to see various global influences in, London's like a hub for the world. So that's completely understandable. But once you leave the areas where people do business and you find yourself in council estates in Barking and Dagenham on the outskirts of London, which are traditional sort of East End Cockney areas, and you go there and half the people don't speak English, which is the case. I've been to parts of London where people just simply don't speak English. There are signs in foreign languages. And you ask yourself, is this a product of London being like part of the global economy? Well, no, because these people are on benefits. They're
Yep.
not working. They don't speak the like. This isn't a product of global business. If it was, it would be a very different story. And actually, the community might actually get along a bit better because people are all there for similar purposes, and they want to be part of a high trust society that functions. But really, what's happening is, the vast majority. I wish I had the statistic in front of me, but I saw it the other day. But the majority of people that have been let into the UK, in I think the last 10 or so years, have been dependents of people who have come to the UK to work. And I say to work, they are working, but they're not in high salary roles. So what happens is people come to the UK, and then they bring their family with them. And it's just no wonder that the UK is effectively bankrupt at this point, because we're paying for social service. I was saying earlier about how we're a mixed economy. We have these massive social programs, the NHS being one of them, which used to work well when I was young. The National Health Service has saved my life multiple times, but it only works if the people accessing it have paid into the system and their parents have paid into the system too. And,
Right.
That's just not the case anymore.
No, and I think it's really fascinating. Somebody had a distinction the other day that I thought was unique. So they said, I have no issue, and I think this is true for most people. I have no issue with a multiracial society, but a multicultural society becomes problematic in that if there is no singular choice about what do we share, what do we kind of, and his point was to sort of speaking around the idea that, in the old world, we had kind of capitalist, communist, and these battles were ideological. And now you don't have these kind of boogeymen. So you're saying, okay, well, this culture is just as no, all cultures are sort of equal across the board, but there are cultures that just don't, they are not going to mesh with a high functioning British society, right? I mean, they're just not going to do that. And I'm not sure that, I think it's the right of a country to say that this is who we are, and
Yeah.
we'd like you to assimilate to that. And I just haven't seen that happening in England and across the Commonwealth, generally speaking. I have not seen that, and I think it speaks to this story that I think I found fascinating this week of the girl. Sort of, she became a meme relatively quickly, with an axe and a knife, sort of
Yeah.
wielding this sort of Joan of Arc stance type of situation. I don't know. I heard Mark Stein talk about it, and I think he had the best point of it, which was not so much like who is the story and who are the players and what is happening, but that behind all of this is this lack of trust that these people that are in England or in the UK, generally speaking, they just can't trust that the copper is going to show up because he's not. In fact, in many cases, and they're blindly turning their eye. You lived in this world, so it'd be interesting to hear you speak of it. And you've spoken often of this radicalization that happens when you're not listened to, which I think is one of the most profound points that no one's listening to. But I think I'd love your opinion on this young gal that
Well,
clearly has become a symbol of something.
I think I'm the part of the last generation to know what it's like to live in high trust Britain. So there was a time when if you were a part of a community, and a community can be as big as a town,
Sure.
So for example, I grew up in Skelmersdale, which is a town outside of Liverpool. And in the center of town was the concourse, which was this 1960s building that was designed to replace the town center. Wasn't a great idea. It's effectively a shopping mall. But anyway, we used to call it the fishbowl because whenever you go to the concourse, you walk around in circles and you see everyone that you know, because the whole town, like everyone knows everyone in Skelmersdale. And so when you're part of this community, children are not just parented by their parents, but if a child does something wrong and a nearby, family friend sees what they're doing, it wasn't uncommon that they get clocked over the head or, get dragged back to their
Right.
parents and marched back home. And so it was like a community effort of raising kids. And I've seen that just slowly disappear. Whenever I go back to my hometown now, it is so radically different than from when I grew up. And bear in mind, I grew up in a poor town, but there was community spirit. And whenever I go back home now, everyone looks and feels so defeated. Not only is the town as underserved as ever in terms of investment from the government, for instance, this will tie in, I promise you.
Yeah, yeah.
Skelmersdale is like one of the biggest towns in the UK that doesn't have a train station. That's a big deal because everyone uses the train in the UK.
Right.
So there's no reason or way for people to get into Skelmersdale by a train. There's all these things that have been done that have just made us this isolated community, but we always had each other, right? Well, now what's happening is the investment is coming in, but that investment is for housing. So they're not increasing the local infrastructure. There's no new doctors. There's no train station. There's, public services as stretched as ever, but now they're building new housing. They're knocking down historic pubs and turning them into huge housing estates. Have a guess who's moving into the housing estates? It's not local people.
Of course not.
So that's putting way more strain on the place economically. There are cultural issues, there's tension, people are more isolated than they were before. And so now we have this situation where it doesn't feel like a high trust society anymore. A good example I always give people is the National Health Service when I was growing up. If I had a splinter in my foot when I was a toddler, when I was a child, and that happened to me, the doctor came with his little doctor case at 7 o'clock in the evening to the house, had a cup of tea with my mum and dad, helped me, did the splinter, and went home. Now, you're lucky if you can get an appointment in 3 weeks. So all that being said, what's happening is families and individuals are feeling more isolated than ever. And when you have injustices like the grooming gang scandal, which I've talked about a million times on here, and people know what that is by now, but it's mostly Muslim men preying on non-Muslim girls in British towns and cities, and that being effectively ignored by the police. Still goes on to this day. And so what happens is we have these young girls out playing, as they do as young girls, that are completely unsafe. The police aren't interested because they know the scandals that come with being interested in this, because the moment you take an interest in this problem, you have to do something about it, and doing something about it makes you a target and makes you the problem. And so these kids are kind of taking things into their own hands. And this is nothing new. Girls have been, protecting themselves for quite some time now, often unsuccessfully, against these gangs. And the young girl you're talking about who waved an axe and a knife in the street, I mean, what can I even say about that? I know the controversy now is that, she wasn't actually waving it at a Muslim immigrant who was going to groom her or something. That's the big excuse people have. Well, no, it was, I believe, a guy from Bulgaria he was an immigrant from Bulgaria who filmed her and appeared to be teasing her. From what I can gather happened here is this young girl and her friend, they know about these gangs. They know what's happening with some of the migrants coming into the UK legally and illegally, and they're arming and preparing themselves and doing what children do, which is, what do you think is going to happen if kids aren't being protected?
Totally.
And then they're out on the street. Then how are they going to defend themselves? They can't fight. Of course, they're going to grab a knife from the kitchen. Like, of course. It happens in schools across the UK. In London, they have metal detectors when people go in schools, not for guns and stuff like that, for knives, kids taking knives. So every time I see these stories, I just can't help but think, told you so. Like,
yeah, I know.
British working class communities have been saying forever that we need to take action against people who disrupt our high trust communities. And if they don't, then people take it into their own hands. And when it's kids, they don't know how serious it is to be wandering the streets with an axe. And if they do know how serious it is, the fact that they did it makes it even worse.
Well, I think that's something that Western society is struggling with generally. Our politeness has induced us a suicide of what we actually are. And so, you can't talk about the troubles. The leadership won't talk about the troubles because they feel like it's impolite or I don't know. That's still an irrational conversation to me as to why leadership won't take on something like this when you're like, well, look, maybe she's diagnosed the person as the wrong person, and she's sort of extrapolating some element of race into that conversation. But at the end of the day, this is a girl that doesn't feel at all as if the society in which she is being raised has her interests in mind at all.
No.
And at that point, then you go, well, then no one's coming to save us. We're not voting our way out of this. So I guess it's knives and axes time. And that's not a great look for anybody.
No, and I really miss home, but being in the States now, I don't see any path to return unless things change radically politically in the UK. But I just don't know how likely that's going to be. It almost feels like we're so far gone. What I will say is that it's nice in a sense that the issues that I was talking about from such a young age, because I saw this stuff
For sure.
from, age 15 or so. And now, 17 years later, we're hearing it talked about more. The Conservative Party, which, was in government before Labour, they're finally addressing it. But at the same time, I don't know how much I can trust these people, because they were in power as we were talking about this. They were in power since 2010.
Yep.
And before that, it was Labour. So any party that's now talking about this, I struggle to take seriously. And even Reform, which is the party led by Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage likes to campaign on issues like this now, but he rides the wave of people who've already addressed those issues and suffered as a result of it. So Nigel Farage, it wasn't that long ago, was among the chorus of people calling people like me racist for saying that we have a grooming gang crisis and that it is religious and that they do target non-Muslim girls. And that was always interpreted as, you think that there are only brown rapists, there are no white rapists in the UK. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. First of all, no, that's not true. There was outrage when the Catholic Church was exposed.
Right.
There's outrage whenever there's a white pedophile in the UK and they go to prison. The problem we have is that there is a specific group of people engaging in a specific crime that is specifically being ignored, and they are not being treated in the same way as white pedophile. Like, how that was never clear, I don't know. But Nigel Farage was among the people who would make those same nonsense claims about us. Now that it's more politically acceptable to talk about, Farage talks about it. But no apologies to the people he smeared along the way. So I just don't know who I trust anymore. And I'm sorry, I know I'm making this into a Britain episode for everyone here, but, the States, what I will say is you guys have different problems, but there's a lot you can learn from looking over at the UK. And these kind of problems do exist over here, by the way, in specific communities and specific parts of the country.
Well, and to speak to Farage for just a moment, I mean, the Butch version of Farage is kind of the phoniest of them all, which is what he always finds his way into that at these kinds of moments. But when he's been pushed to try to have these conversations in real time, he for whatever reason, he doesn't feel like this can win him an election. So he'll say this at the right moments, but it in goes kind of Pansy Farage and out comes Butch Farage, and then goes back to Pansy Farage. And it's really, I don't know, it contributes to the disingenuousness of the entire political system of the West. To shift topics a little bit to America, it's tangential to this, but the shooting this week at the schools. I mean, I wrote a piece for House and Habit about it. And it's really more about a conversation much bigger than just whether or not this is about trans or SSRIs or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, it may find that those are sort of culpable aspects to this. But the reality is like we have a dark society that doesn't understand this sort of divine imprint on their life. And so that this is the natural conclusion of everyone's does their own thing and finds their own truth. We end up in these situations in which people sort of take matters into their own hands. But in the similar instance, there have been lots of stories about how this particular Catholic school had sort of come out in this kind of trans atmosphere of frustration and hatred, and sort of after the other school shooting in Nashville that was like this. This school kind of pleaded to the governor, Tim Walz, our former vice presidential candidate with the Harris campaign, and asked for money to sort of beef up security related to this. And of course, it falls on deaf ears because it doesn't suit an agenda. And obviously it's this kind of, well, no, don't worry about this kind of situation. We're in a similar deal. Our politicians don't listen to us. The middle class has lost any kind of connection to a voice. I wrote another piece this week about the Cracker Barrel stuff. The only reason this is even a thing is because it's the only place that anyone feels that they can have a victory. They go out and scream about Cracker Barrel's deal, and the logo goes back, and they feel like they won something. They did it with Bud Light. But in politics, no one can do it. Like, no one can actually go out and make these connections because they look at it and go, nothing's going to change. This bureaucracy's a mess. These people don't listen. Their agendas are totally different than mine, and my kids are dead. It's just a really sick moment in Western society. And I don't know how to pinpoint what's going on with that. I don't know why leaders won't listen, but I'd be curious if you had a take on that.
I think I know, because I've thought about this a lot. And ultimately, I think it's a power game, because if you look at the polls and various studies, and the perception gap being one of them that I've cited a million times before, the perception gap is a study that shows that the vast majority of Americans are completely incapable of accurately describing the views of those with whom they disagree.
Right.
And it's an ongoing study. You can go on the website now and see how it's changing over time, because they continually poll people. And it finds that the left is generally worse at describing the views of people on the right, but the right is also incapable of accurately describing the views of people on the left. Now, the reason why that's the case is because the most exposure that people typically get of those with whom they disagree are the really vocal radicals. And so they assume that those vocal radicals represent the views of a larger population than they actually do. Now, if you go down, I've done this before, and I forget which book it was, but one of my books, I then went down into the data and said, okay, well, let's look at what people do actually believe. And as I say, you find that people agree way more than they actually disagree. So that leaves us with a problem, because politicians are interested in representing the views of those most likely to vocally support them, not just vote for them, but vocally support them. And if the people who are most likely to vocally support them publicly then are progressives, for example, then they're going to have to parrot and push this progressive line. And that's why you end up with politicians talking as though they come from Tumblr and a Tumblr account in 2012. The old student, do you know what I'm talking about? The old progressive student language.
Yes.
All the nonsense words. There was a recent, who was it? I forget who published this, but there's like a strategy group advising the Democrats who told them to stop using words like unhoused to mean homeless and all that sort of stuff. But the reason all this came about is because politicians pander to those who support them most vocally and most publicly. Yeah. And what that means is they end up representing ideas that divide Americans down the middle and Brits down the middle. And so politicians are now competing with the most radical right-wing voices, the most radical left-wing voices are competing with one another. It becomes a slinging match rather than a political debate. Excuse me, a slanging match. And that's how we ended up here. Because if you look at the views of the politicians, or at least the views that they express, not necessarily what they believe, but what they express, and compare them to what the vast majority of Americans believe, they're not even remotely on the same page. Look at the abortion issue, for example.
Yes.
If you look at what the Democrats are saying on abortion, and then you look at what the American people believe, and actually, if you look at what the Republicans are saying on abortion and what the American people believe, Republicans are here, Democrats are here, the American people are right in the middle. The Americans are generally in favor of the kind of rules we used to have in the UK until Labour cocked it all up a few months ago, which was we just had a simple cutoff line of, you can have an abortion up till this point. I think it was 2 or 3 months, something like that. It's fairly short. And then after that, no, that's it. And that was that's generally popular in the States. So anyway, this is a long way of me saying, I think the reason why we have so much hostility is that this is the example we're giving to young people. Not only are we showing younger people who've never engaged in politics before that this is what politics looks like, but then the young people who do know what politics is, you're only engaging with the ones who are the most radical and vocal online. So you're engaging with crazy people and radicalizing more young people as a result, which is nonsense. And what that tells me is that this country's counter-extremism infrastructure is woefully inadequate, because you can't look at any government or non-governmental program or non-profit program that works in the counter-extremism space and think, okay, that you cannot assume that any of them are really going to be successful, because ultimately we are flawed from the get-go. We are telling children that these radical ideas are the norm, and that you need to effectively go to war with your own peers who don't agree with you. And so as long as our politicians are engaging in the way that they do, in such a hostile way, no counter-extremism infrastructure that we have in the United States or even in the UK will ever be effective, because of the example that's being set to begin with. And that's why you end up with kids in schools. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, kind of in a similar vein, one of the things that I had a really lovely conversation yesterday with a former Kennedy staffer. We met for coffee down in Boulder. Wonderful afternoon together, spent a couple hours talking. One of the things that we spent most of our conversation on was this kind of new press in the digital space related to AI. And one of the things I wanted to kind of visit about that I thought was really fascinating is the lawsuit against ChatGPT that just came out. I think it was yesterday or the day before, that basically accuses ChatGPT of being the impetus for a son's suicide. Mm-hmm. That he sort of became convinced by the computer that his life was not worth living, and the parents have sued the whatever OpenAI or whatever the company's name is. And I think, we've talked and lamented a lot about AI, and I still remain convinced that this should be treated with far greater fear than nuclear weapons. Yeah. Like I said to this man yesterday, at the Kennedy staffer yesterday, the reality was, like, nuclear war, I'm less afraid of, because it would be over in an instant anyway. I wouldn't even know what happened.
Right.
With AI, I'm going to watch my children and my grandchildren and anybody else sort of fall into this moment of despair and inability to do anything, not have a life and not have a job. And Andrew Yang's the only guy talking about it, and he's offering $1,000 as your monthly stipend for being, which is not, no one can even live on $1,000 in the United States. It's that's yesterday's shopping trip to Safeway. So, I feel like that's an interesting piece to kind of move into, is this AI conversation. Again, I know we talk about it a lot, but I think it is the most existential threat to humanity. And I just cannot understand this maximalist push to we always have to do it because it exists. We have to do it. I mean, we don't let countries have nuclear weapons. We're willing to go bomb them from afar to not have them have nuclear weapons because we see it as a threat. Why do we not see this thing as a larger threat than that? I'm still at a loss for that.
AI can be weaponized in so many different ways. I mean, as our viewers and readers may know already, I report every day on national security and defense and war issues, and we're already seeing AI being incorporated into drones, into aircrafts, and so on. So that in itself is remarkable and scary, but it can be weaponized in different ways, So for example, the reason I bring this up is if you look at Iran has this very old air force. It's using planes that were developed in the 60s and 70s by China, Russia, United States. They don't have a great air force. Their air defenses are very weak. They have a burgeoning missile industry, but that's going to come crashing down because of the sanctions that are going to be re-implemented within the next 30 days by the E3. And so what that means is Iran really isn't much of a military threat. The only way they can strike the US, like Washington and New York, is if they move their vessels to within 2,000 miles of like US coastlines, and then they start firing their missiles because they don't have ICBMs. And so like you can look at them as like this weak nation, right? But then imagine a country like Iran with AI, with a bunch of really clever guys and hackers who can use AI for all sorts of purposes, espionage and so on. You know, Iran already uses proxies like the Houthis to disrupt trade through various shipping lanes and so on. Just imagine the damage that's going to eventually be done by AI. We are going to empower very small, rogue, crazy states to do very, very serious things as AI gets better and better. And ironically, it will be built on technology that we made because they're going to find their way to it. And so that I find quite scary. But I saw yesterday OpenAI CEO, I don't know if he's CEO because it's technically a non-profit, but whatever, Sam Altman was saying that there is a major AI fraud crisis coming that his company may have played a part in. It's like, well, no, not may. You did this, and we've been thinking about. Isn't that incredible?
I just can't. Honestly, they're intolerable. Their conversation, if you listen to him, he's like, well, this probably is the end of humanity. But in the meantime, we'll build a bunch of great businesses along the way. Why do these people have any credibility with anybody? I do not understand it. There was a great point somebody made that was like, this democracy is this perfect cover in which we can allow these billionaires and the oligarchs and everybody else to sort of run the world while we blame our neighbor because he wears a MAGA hat. Like, it's just, it's because he voted for the wrong person. My life is miserable because you voted for the wrong person. No, it has something to do with these knuckleheads that are like, have you been in a room with a billionaire? They're not fun people. They're creepy.
Yeah. I mean, and Altman in particular, I find him, how would I describe him? Unsettling, I think.
Totally.
Because
central casting of like the bad guy from like The Incredibles or whatever. It's super weird.
It's like a personality disorder situation with people like him, because I see them going on television and doing or not television, podcasts these days, and talking about how it's going to, potentially the end of the world. But as you say, then in the meantime, we're going to do this, this, and this. They're giving two messages to the world, knowing that certain audiences will pick up on one or the other. And it seems to me that a lot of people in Congress and in Washington, in the White House, are not listening to the end of the world scenarios and are focusing instead on these promises of, an economic boom. The problem is, every time I look at the data, we're seeing more jobs lost.
It's not real.
Jobs kept are being those working in industries where the jobs are so far safe are being lumped with higher workloads because they're using AI. Meanwhile, the technology itself is actually not getting that much better. It's kind of peaked at this point now where ChatGPT 5 is nowhere near as capable as they said it was. They said it was going to be AGI, and it's not. In fact, it's less accurate than the model from before, and it's hallucinating even more. So what they've done, in my books, is economic terrorism. That's what I think this is. And
I totally agree with that.
Writing a book on this, right? Because if you think about it, economic terrorism is a disruption to an economic model with ideological goals. Well, they're very clear that they're ideological because they believe in this post-human society where we don't...
Transhumanism, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's ideological, and they're disrupting the economy. And in doing so, and to facilitate this, they're telling people whatever it is that they want to hear. So they're willing to lie or tell the truth, depending on the audience. All of this points to economic terrorism in my books. I consider them terrorists because they are disrupting the national economy. It is only going to get worse. We are only seeing job losses as a result of this. And Christ, the last thing we need right now is another major political divide where, half the population is fine with it and the other half is not so happy with it. We're already seeing the protests happening. And let me tell you, when people start losing their jobs in greater numbers than they are now, and when the people losing work and losing business are in less niche industries than the creative arts and so on, we're going to see trouble, I think. And
I totally agree with that. I think people are calling AI their employee. So is that employee paying taxes? Are you paying your W-2? Are you W-2ing your AI? There's all sorts of conversations around this that is like, can anybody just look 10 days into the future and figure out that this thing is not healthy for us? I just don't. It's beyond me. Like, who's going to pay the taxes if there's nobody
Mhm.
to earn the income to do the jobs that the government confiscates from us anyway? So, like, what happens in these scenarios? Are we're just destined to sort of like go along with it because it's there? I have a real estate kind of partner with me, and he's a young guy that's kind of bought his first real house type of thing, and he's like, hey, I got this notice from my power bill that it's going up because of all the new data centers. He's like, I didn't ask for a new data center. So what, now we're all sharing this burden of this sort
Interesting.
of this thing that no one really wants, and yet we're sort of saying, well, this is the only way forward. It's like, I don't understand why we're here. How did we get here to where this is just a fait accompli, that because AI is so good, we have to use it. It has to be this maximalist society and everything that we always do. Now we're here, and now I get to bear the burden as in my power costs and in my taxes and in the sort of evaporation of the future for my children. Like, what in the hell have we done?
You know what's scary as well is, how I was saying that the technology is kind of peaked right now. Well, I say peaked, really what it is diminishing returns. So the technology has been trained on effectively the entire internet, and then illegally obtained content like books, including my books that it
Yeah.
illegally obtained and was trained on. But now they've reached a point where there's not much left for it to train on. So it can either be trained on new content that has been produced by AI, but then it's AI training AI, and
Yep.
that's not great because it's not actually giving it really new information. The other thing is that it's going to end up being trained on private data. So, messages you've sent on Messenger. That reminds me, I should probably get a Facebook Messenger at this point. Things you've posted for years and years and years on platforms you trusted. Private data is going to eventually be accessible by these AI companies if they're not accessible already, because they just update the user agreement and
They don't care. Yeah.
you click yes, and that's that. And so, but regardless, even with that, the data training sets are getting smaller and smaller, and some people describe what's happening as an AI winter. My understanding is there's been two AI winters before, 1970s and 1990s. AI is not new. It's been around for a long
Sure.
time. But when it reaches these sort of winters is when the technology kind of peaks, and they don't really know how to get beyond that. And Sam Altman has been promising AGI, general intelligence, and ASI, super intelligence, for some time now. And if you read what the experts in these fields are saying, large language models, which is what ChatGPT is, they simply don't have the capacity and capability of becoming the technology that Sam Altman says they could become. Because really what you're looking at is a system that makes predictions and notices patterns. And that is, in a sense, how the human brain works, but not fully. There's a lot
Right.
more to it. So we've not actually reached this intelligence stage. It's kind of like a Wizard of Oz situation. It's pretending to be something that it's not. And here's why that's a problem. It might sound like, oh, well, isn't that good because we're not going to get artificial superintelligence and so on and so on. Well, no, because what's happening is we've got now incomplete technology, if you want to look at it that way,
Yes.
that can conduct or go about some roles and some tasks to a good enough level without actually really excelling in it. And what that means is more people will lose their jobs, others will be forced to use AI, people widely adopt AI by choice, and the general quality of work, I think, is going down. So we're seeing job losses.
Yep.
People are not communicating very well anymore. Everyone writes the same. People are drawing the same conclusions because they're asking AI to help them form their own opinions. And so really what they've done, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is economic terrorism, is they've completely disrupted society with all these promises of ASI and AGI and fully automated luxury communism, but they won't call it that. And for what? For incomplete technology that ruins people's lives and makes everyone dumber? Great. Real great.
Is that your book title, Fully Automated Luxury Communism? I like that title.
I've written about that. That's actually, have you never heard that phrase before?
I think you've said that before, and I like that phrase.
Yeah, it was coined by communists, like modern day communists. I believe in the UK that they run a media operation in the UK, and they've been talking about fully automated luxury communism for years. And I wrote a piece about it some years ago for a think tank called the Frontier Center, and I was completely poo-pooing the idea because that was pre ChatGPT. It
Right.
wasn't pre AI, but it was pre AI that we know now. And I was saying, explaining how it was, completely, you know, a wacky idea. It's not going to happen. And now AI come around, and I'm like, oh, actually, yeah, it's a wacky idea, but it's possible. But it's also just the future I don't want to live in, you know?
Yeah. Well, you and I went back and forth a little bit on full service gas stations on a piece that I wrote not too long ago. But I think it's a similar deal. I'm tired. Like everything is self service because there's no margins left because the
Yeah.
money's ruined. But now you've introduced something entirely new in which every time you put a prompt into a phone, you're creating your own demise. As a you're adding and contributing to this intelligence level, and I don't know. It's a terrifying thing. Somebody should step up and say we're not doing this. And if a leader stepped up and said that, versus sort of someone who just kind of keeps going along with this conversation that we have to have it all the time. Yeah, I think it's useful in certain things. I'm certain it is, just as computers are useful in certain things. And I'm not a Luddite in this deal, but there's something terrifying about the idea that this this relentless pursuit of a computer that runs the world. I'm just not into it. I think there's too much beauty in humanity. It's too much imprint of the divine upon the souls of people. If you take that away, and that divine imprint is just sort of like negated because their usefulness is gone, I don't think anybody wants to see that world. I really don't.
It 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 will be a world of defeated people.
Yeah, that's not a place to be to
And I
live.
already feel defeated, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah,
It's only
most
affect.
do.
I don't feel like I'm the same person anymore because of the way it's impacted me in terms of business, but also in terms of what I observe around me. Because now I have to second guess everything. I don't know when something's real and when something is AI. And also when I read people, I had to briefly work with AI for a while, so I know how it sounds when it's used. And I see AI in virtually every piece of written content that I see out in the world today. It's on signs, it's on posters, it's in the news that you read. And don't go thinking that just because you read a mainstream news site that they're not using AI.
Oh,
They're
absolutely
using
not.
AI.
They're
And
the
even,
most they're the most prolific users.
of course, and you see it in the phrases and the terminology that's used within the content. Suddenly, bad writers are better writers. Good writers can be made better writers if they use AI in certain ways. Maybe you're using it for research purposes and so on. But in terms of drawing conclusions, it's nowhere near as good as human beings at that because it's not a human being. But my point is, I just see a general decline in quality of content that is published, not just written, but visual and
All
even
of it.
audio now too. Everything has just declined. And my hope, and I really don't know how likely this is, we'll have to see, but my hope is that it becomes so obvious to enough people that it creates a return or encourages a return to sort of live performance and perhaps encourages people to return to the arts and ditch AI entirely. But then again, the problem with that is you can still never really trust anyone because you just don't know who's using it and who isn't.
No, not unless you see the violin being played. It's which strangely, and I had this kind of wrap it up on this AI stuff. When I was talking yesterday. I think the only people that are going to be safe, at least until the very end of the destruction of humanity and the apocalypse that's coming by computer, I think are the people who can do creative things, who can play music or still write without the use of AI, communicate good ideas, create video and artistic pieces, paint. Those people they will be the last. I think at some point there's nobody to buy their or consume their stuff. So at some point that becomes a problematic situation because no one will be able to afford anything, but because they won't have jobs, they have nothing to do. They're
No, but
despondent. All the
you'll
rest.
have your £1,000 a month from the government, so you can afford your tins of beans.
Ugh, yuck. Good episode, Jack. Good to talk. I hope that covers things. I kind of want to continue to grow this with our audience, the subscribers in particular. I hope that they find it good. I just always appreciate people doing it. We'll try our best, I think, next week to toss it out that if somebody wants to sort of join in with a question, that we'll kind of put something out early in the morning. I'll try to do that so that if there's questions and people want to do something that we could try to respond to that. But I think it's a good format. I hope people like it. If you are if you're looking at this as a paid subscriber, thank you. And if you're want to share it with somebody else, we always offer one of these free. The first one is always free to somebody who hasn't seen it. So if there's an unpaid subscriber or a gift subscription you want to give to somebody, let us know, because we'd love to kind of continue to build our audience. I guess it's been great. It's really amazing. We have almost nearly kind of moving into some territory with people that are subscribing to us that I didn't think we'd get to. So it's pretty cool, and I appreciate it. And I really do appreciate Substack, because they don't seem to throttle any of this. It's a very good thing.
I've got to the point now where I effectively don't really advertise at all on Twitter. Maybe I should. We always talk about this, but the thing is, I find it doesn't work, because for whatever reason, my Twitter account, ever since 2018, I know I sound like one of those conspiracy people, but I'm pretty sure it's shadow banned, because it was growing and growing and growing in 2018, when I was really in the height of the media work that I was doing at the time. And then one day it just stopped, and it never grew, and then started declining. And to this day, I will put a post out, and with more than 10,000 followers, I'll have 30 views on one post.
Yeah, same.
Statistically, that makes no sense. So I've kind of reached a point where I don't bother anymore. So anything that we publish here is published here, and if people find it here, great, but that's really probably the only way they're going to find it. So that's crazy. So we absolutely appreciate everyone who's coming along on this.
I will put a plug in for our friend Jeff Dornick, who has put together something called Pickaxe, which is kind of a new social media thing he's attempting, and he really is trying to say, hey, your freedom of speech is dependent upon your reach. And what he's doing is really awesome. So I'll put that plug in for Jeff. Good guy, kind of one of the guys. We interviewed him during the Kennedy guy. He was kind of a right-wing guy that actually ended up coming into the Kennedy world, and I think is a very brilliant and smart guy doing some really cool stuff. So Pickaxe, if people are there, that's also places that I think we'll have a growing platform in the future. So anyway, great to see you, Jack. We'll catch up next Friday.
Cheers.